Gonna cheese away hard ya. Gonna cheese she sees ko has anika itisha ani ya akwan. Gonna cheese away ya ki ya wahi da teaching the lady. Yake hawe. Yake away sing get hasati. Hachi yes would do to ye. Away how you can get hahapusti. Yet away to us to Tahi school. Estasa ayah kuge how you hatum. Estasa ayana hatutsi. Kushtiach wasa kun hasayanas cage. Which yach get us away the katuha. Which yach get us. Sugar car was tea. Like a car which has a tea on. A joy to on. A kusahan in. Away ha copas tea. Wush got to school. Yeah, after was a good. Had the Trankisani Kagayas. Aka has a gursaku das away hit with its a cool. Awa has to eat a key has a tea, you han. Goodness cheese. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to those who were kind on your ancestral lands, the Akwan. Thank you to those who worked for the events happening today. It's good. It's good. It's good that we are indigenous. It was made for us, our language, and our ways of living. This is one thing I want you to really know. Nothing measures up to our language. Nothing is more valuable. It doesn't matter what they keep saying. We are equal. Equal. We're not the same people, no. We are together though, and because of that, let us live with love and kindness. Let's get to know each other. This is how I want it to be for our future generations, our little grandchildren. And then they will know what it means to know Shingit. Yes, we are the seeds in their remains. Goodness, chiefs. My non-Tuach C. Dorothy Dennis was my first instructor in the School of Indigenous Resistance. After her, there was Kekne Nora Dowan. I wanted to share a poem of Nora's from the Droning Shaman. I first heard her read this in Fairbanks, and when I heard the title, I was so ready. And then it washed over me really fast. But I always just come back and keep thinking about it and thinking about her. Genocide. Picketing the Eskimo Whaling Commission, an overfed English girl stands with the sign, "Let the whales live." I would like to share with you some of the experiences of my resistance. I want to tell you about some things that I see in the world that reveal patterns of inequity and prescribe life and death for descendants of colonial cycles that made America possible. There are actions and behaviors that are on an unyielding and obvious cycle of repetition, and we are just not talking about them. To begin looking at this, we have to see the racism inherent in the colonial mindset. There are laws and Supreme Court rulings that are founded on concepts of racial superiority and inferiority. Those are the two concepts I really would like us to focus on the most. if you listen and you find yourself thinking, well, he is against America, then I want you to keep thinking. And if you say he is against white people, I want you to keep thinking, because you might not be hearing the words that I'm saying. Walter Echo explores some of these concepts, these often ignored concepts, in his landmark text, In the Courts of the Conqueror, the 10 Worst Indian Law Cases Ever Decided, as we can see in some of the following passages. As Professor Robert Williams asks, and like a loaded weapon, how can legal advocates expect to win lawsuits by citing cases that call Native Americans savages and by relying upon legal principles founded on the racial inferiority of their clients? In confirming the absolute power over Indians, the court in Lone Wolf versus Hitchcock, 1903, promised only that its exercise will be tempered by such considerations of justice as would control a Christian people in their treatment of an ignorant and dependent race. I think we need to explore some of this stuff. There are laws that build the foundation of federal Indian law, Supreme Court rulings that call Native American people savages, call us primitive, call us inferior, call us dependent. These go way back. The foundation of federal Indian law is the foundation of the United States of America. Without federal Indian law, there is no legal method of dispossessing indigenous people of their lands. Some would think that colonialism and its racist foundations are a thing of the past. Some would say that we have come so far. These are thinly veiled self-congratulatory lies that are intended to keep you blind, going along what seems like the only course, the path that has been handed down from above and includes genocides and oppressions that hide in the shadows from day to day. Racism is not a ghost of horrible yesterdays, but is in fact a foundation of the structures of colonial America, leaving us with hard choices. Look into the crawl space that is full of bodies and the tongues of children, or live blind while chasing dreams that only fulfill themselves. This leads us to the words of Moana Jackson, Maori legal rights activist and scholar. This is from a speech shared with me by one of my colleagues and a former student, Maka Jinatla Mantua. Mr. Jackson says, and this speech it's brilliant. It is absolutely just brilliant. And at one point, he says, talking about people gathering and talking about colonialism. He says, I commend you on all the work that you do. But there is a danger sometimes that we can turn something as potentially personally destructive as colonization into an abstraction, into a historical artifact, which diminishes or invisibilizes the violence, the destructive harm that it does. Because colonization is not some abstract theory. It is a belief assumed by most of the states in Europe that they had the right to dispossess indigenous peoples who had done them no harm and posed no threat. And that presumption in itself is an act of violence. The racism which underpinned and continues to underpin colonization is an act of violence. And I think as we gather the knowledge so that we can perceive the mana that we have, it is important not to diminish the reality of that violence. Because if we do, then we diminish the suffering of our people who endured through its terrible hurt and agony ever since 1840. And we owe those people, we owe our makahuna, together our strength and together our knowledge, that we do not diminish the pain which they have endured. So this brings me to a reflection of policy change in Alaska. And I want to start at the end. I saw this really silly movie, and this guy's like, well, I should start at the end, then move to the middle, then go to the beginning, then But I want to start at the end of the story because I think there's this little kind of nugget that's a metaphor. So we signed this bill, we passed this bill, and I'll tell you kind of how it got started and how it ended up. And it made me just think a lot about governance and the people who do some of the governing. And I should say that I'm a storyteller. So if I see things and I hear things, I tell them. And I don't think of this as gossip, especially if people are enacting their duties as elected officials. If they are saying and doing things as elected officials, it's on the record. There are some things that I'll share with you that weren't on the record, but that I think should be in the public knowledge. So as we signed this bill, the signing was ever delayed so that Mr. Parnell could take it onto the stage at AFN and share a wonderful moment that he was no part of in hopes of gaining some momentum with the Alaska Native folk. I was asked to find as many people as I could to say the following lines in their Alaska Native language. Thank you. Now my language is an official language of the state of Alaska. So I did. I worked with a network of people. We got a lot of, I think we had maybe 16 languages. And people began to give their speeches. And AFN said, you're not going to have the main stage, but you can have this room. The room was packed. And when the speeches started, they were heartfelt. There were elders talking about when they went to school and people would smack them for speaking their language. They would share stories of oppression. And they felt really good about being able to say something. Well, Mr. Parnell has someone who works for him who's wearing a sealskin vest. And he started coming up, and some of his other people that worked for him started coming up and telling me that we had to hurry up. The first time somebody said it, I said, we've been waiting a long time for this, and this is official languages. Now, I'm not going to tell people to stop talking, and I'm going to tell them not to talk. I'm just not the right guy for that job. And they kept coming. So my rhetoric changed. They would come up and say, we have to wrap this up. The governor has to be somewhere. And I said, yeah, okay. And then I just stood there. Maybe the fourth or fifth time, this guy in a sealskin jacket comes up. And he comes up behind me to tell me that we have to wrap it up. And he takes his thumb and he puts it in the back of my rib cage and pushes really hard. And it was awkward. In hindsight, I probably should have hollered something. And I just want to say, I'm really happy this is an Indigenous event. I know it's an Indigenous event because somebody texted me before I came here and said, could you bring the spear that ties up the limbs of a seal? And so we have it here. It belongs to Cyril George. But I think about that stuff because I think, well, who's going to ever know that this guy was trying to muscle me during that time? Not that I'm anybody, but the fact that we got these pictures and there's big smiles and everybody's happy. Everybody was pretty happy. But it was quite a journey to get here, and this journey included confronting some things that I think we still need to be aware of, and we still need to locate, talk about, and somehow overcome. So I made this, I don't know if my wordsmithing is at all accurate, but I want to celebrate the sesquidecimillennial. We're celebrating 15,000 years of Indigenous resistance. And so I made this little graphic, and I don't know if you could see it, but there's this really long blue line and this really tiny yellow line. And the yellow line is mathematically 1% as long as the blue line. And that's mathematically as long as colonial forces have been in Alaska compared to Indigenous peoples. And I like to just I like to tease about this stuff, because I think sometimes we act like white people showing up is a really big deal. And it usually is. And I'm not trying to say it isn't. But I was sitting with my brother one time, we were watching this movie. And these guys are in Africa, and they said, we're going to be the first people to ever climb this mountain. And I thought, well, this is going to be neat. So we watched this documentary, and they struggle, and it's when they get to the top, and they're yelling, and they're excited. We're like, yeah, it's a pretty good game. I'm watching it with my brother. And then the African guys, they turn the camera on them, and they're like, yeah, we come up here every summer. I thought, could we start the movie with that? So I could just say, let's just. So I want to talk about how, I think about this stuff all the time, because I think, how are we possibly going to pave the way for a more equitable future? And I think we have. We have been doing that. I don't want to disregard anything that has been done. But I want to say there's these weird echoes that do happen, and we'll get to some of those echoes. So in my mind, I see things in these, I like to see things in forms. So I think of things in terms of institutions, individuals, communities, individuals, institutions, cultures is what I should say, and places. And so the ways that I think of that is from a language perspective. If you have a language that is in a very troubled state, like the Tlingit language, like the Haida language, like the Tsimshian language, then one of your goals is to get individuals to talk. If I could just get people to talk, I would get a lot more sleep. And then you think about cultures. When you get groups of people together, how do you get them to put their language on the table? When you get to institutions, how do you make sure that they're not trying to keep you out of the door? Because that's all they have to do now. All these colonial mechanisms are in place. So I think if everybody just does business as usual and doesn't get into the uncomfortable territory, languages will die, these cultures will go away. And the problem is this was the stated goal of the federal government, was to eliminate indigenous people by killing off who they were. So we have to come to grips with that and say, okay, that is happening now. We are human beings. We have the ability to counteract historical forces that are genocidal. So I think about these things, because then I think, well, what are my strategies? How am I going to go forward? How can I continue looking at this stuff? So that we think of all these different sort of, you got social structures, you got knowledge systems, you have a lot of othering. Othering means there's a lot of stuff going on here. If you guys want to do your thing, you can, but not here. And this is where education is. This is where the public is. And so we see this interesting transition from signs that would say no dogs or Indians allowed. And no sign, you can't have those signs ever. But I don't know if I understand this genuine history correct, but I do believe there was somebody who argued against an anti-discrimination act who might have a street name named after him here in Georgia. But maybe that's a different person from his family. I don't really know that. But I want to make a statue kind of a thing. People are into statues, or like some kind of monument to Elizabeth Baratovich, and put Shattuck's words on there, and then put her words on there. And the reason why I want to examine those words, because when we were pushing for this language bill, we heard the same words. Well, we'll look at that. We'll look at that. So here we are in Alaska. 4 language families, 20 languages. If we go back 150 years, 100% of indigenous people speak their own language. Now it's around 10%. It's around 10%. If we look, and these are only estimates, these are the languages, some of them are in Canada, some of them are in Alaska, some of them are in Russia. But the red, so there's 20 languages, and as we go through, we'll count red. Red means there's under 10%. Under 10% of their population. These are only estimates. It's probably a little bit worse than this. So, well, this one also includes Russia, so we'll skip those that are outside of Alaska. We'll just focus on Alaska. So here's 2 out of 20. We have two that are safe. Central Yupik and Siberian Yupik. Those are the only two safe languages in Alaska. And I don't think if things continue as they are, without some sort of dedicated focus change, I think they are also in trouble. So now we go down, there's 3, 4, 5 in the red, 6, because one has no speakers. Although for Nishka and Gitkasan, which are actually two separate languages, this data comes from the Alaska Native Language Center. I would actually say, well, there are speakers in Canada of those languages. I don't think that's as alarming because the 100 or so Nishka and Gitkasan people who live in Alaska are outside of their ancestral homeland, though they are the neighboring and related language of Coast Tsimshian. So it's something that's, so we'll say we're up to 5. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Severely endangered language. So we're looking at, if let's say you're 20 years old right now. By the time 20 years from now, when you're close to my age, most of these languages will probably be gone. And we have to think about that. So here's 3 more to add to it. And so the overall picture is very grim. The overall picture is one of people dying under the footprint of the colonial era of the United States of America, which has not ended. And so I think of things like this when I see images like these guys with their tiki torches and their khakis, which people like to make fun of, but they are terrified. There are people who are demanding an all-white state or some kind of all-white institution at various levels. And so these are people that we sometimes pay a lot of attention to. And they might be waving flags, and they might be yelling, and they might be wielding guns. But I'm also very scared of the academic catalog. How come Northwest Coast arts are not considered a fine arts GER? And that's just our example. And you could find examples all over the place where if you say, well, what do you need to graduate high school? And what do you need to graduate college? And does that include Indigenous content? And so people get a little upset. People say that this is some kind of agenda that's going to make people do things. To which I say, well, I know all about agendas that make people do things. And what I'm trying to do, even Indigenous people, as I've advocated for our languages, have said, you're trying to do to us what they did to us. And so I really think you should study the boarding school era. I think you should study the things that people have gone. The examples of sort of dramatic side-by-side comparisons of equity and oppression, sometimes they make me, I would laugh if it wasn't so scary. There was a group of people that were going to put up a totem pole in Oregon, and it was a really blatant act of cultural appropriation. So when there was enough attention paid to it, to these guys who were the Flamingo Clan, apparently they just make it up as they go. When they were stopped, somebody stepped forward and said, congratulations, Oregon, on enforcing cultural apartheid. And apartheid, you can't carve a totem pole and put it up at a public event and host a feast, and there's no Indigenous people there, and the State Fair doesn't want to do that. That's your version of apartheid? I thought you should just go study apartheid, because I think an artistic holocaust might be another equivalent sort of term. But I think about this stuff because I think in the call for equity, you will have people with a tremendous amount more of social power who will say that they are being oppressed. I would say if you wanted to do something about Indigenous languages in Alaska, We would say, okay, well, everybody who graduates high school in Alaska takes 1 semester of an Alaska Native language. I don't think that's oppression at all. We're not going to stuff chemicals into the mouths of children. We're not going to hit them. We're not going to pick them up and shake them around. We're not going to tell them. You know, this one elder, she said, I never got hit. But every day my teacher would see me and she'd say, come here, come over here. But this is a little girl. There's a little girl in this house. I have little girls. I think about this stuff all the time. And her teacher says, you know, you're never going to be anything but a second-class citizen. You'll never be as good as us. No matter how hard you try, I want you to know that. That's a teacher. So I want to explore the argument for white separatism. Right? So there's all these, you know, separate but equal type of things, and you can hear it in a lot of different arenas. So, for example, this comes from a wonderful essay. It's a little bit long, but as they put forward the Anti-Discrimination Act, which really at the heart says you cannot keep people out of places because of who they are. One of the core pieces was these no Indians allowed signs. So just skipping to when they hit the opposition, Senator Alan Shattuck says, far from being brought closer together, which will result from this bill, the races should be kept further apart. Who are these people, barely out of savagery, who want to associate with us whites with 5,000 years of recorded civilization behind us? They continue to argue that by allowing people from different races to be together in the same space, you'll only have racial tension. So you'll see Senator Collins says, the Eskimos are proud of their origins and are aware that harm comes to them from mixing with whites. It is the mixed who is not accepted by either race that causes the trouble. I believe in racial pride and do not think this bill will do other than arouse bitterness. So now let's go forward. So that's 1945. Let's go forward to about 2014. I was invited to give a talk at the Central Council of Tlingit Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska at their tribal assembly. At that tribal assembly, I really focused on making Alaska Native languages official languages, because Alaska at the time was one of the few technically English-only states in the United States. And then the other things I was trying to focus on were immersion daycares, immersion schools, and trying to have mandatory content, indigenous content for people in education. So the Ketchikan Daily News Miner, or the Ketchikan Daily News, sorry, comes out with this editorial, right? So this is not like a letter to the editor. This is the editor. And he says, or she, whoever, it's appropriate for Alaska to remember its past, particularly the language spoken here through history. Alaska is a rich and multicultural state. Its official language is English. It may have been Russian at one point in time. It could have turned out to be Eyak, one of many native tongues. But in fact, Alaskans, through the turn of events, made English the official language. House Bill 216 would change that, making 20 Alaska Native languages official in the state as well. But given that few Alaskans speak those languages, it is a symbolic gesture and should be characterized as such in the bill. Clearly, not only in Alaska, but throughout the nation, official business is conducted in English, because that's the language most people here speak. We're all one people. We've either been here for centuries or we've come from places throughout the world. As we've assimilated, we've maintained some local customs and brought others with us, leaving behind societies where German, Japanese, Vietnamese, and Spanish are the official languages of the land. Some of us might still speak native languages, or we know someone who does, but we've evolved into a society where English is the official language. Every year, new Alaskans and Americans arrive or are born here. They are just as much Alaskan and American as those who came before them. Most will learn to speak English, but some also will be taught other languages in an effort to preserve cultural history. Second languages have been taught in Alaska schools for at least 50 years. To know how to speak a second language is commendable and often helpful when traveling or welcoming visitors. People have the freedom here to speak their language of choice. For some, that has been wrongly denied in the past, but in the present, that wrong has been recognized and rectified. A state or a nation should have only one official language, if only to control the cost of government and business and to enable all of us to communicate with each other. But it's wise to remember our history and the ways in which we have communicated. So it's a very condescending and inaccurate statement. And some of the things I would point out is we're all one people and we're not one people, and we won't be one people. And we don't have to be one people. One people, even in its most endearing and well-meaning terms, means assimilating to one, right? Because someone said that, they said, how come we can't just be one? I said, well, which one? Because if we're all speaking Tlingit, then I'll say probably. Also, I'm not sure where the past has really been rectified. I keep looking for that, and now maybe I should ask them to do a series of articles on how the past has been rectified. So, similar to the anti-discrimination bill, flies through the House, and we felt pretty good. We began to see some opposition, but that opposition was actually easily corrected. People who were opposed to the bill end up signing on as co-sponsors. They began saying things similar to that article. Well, my parents came here from Russia, or my ancestors, and we assimilated. And my family came here from Norway, and we stopped speaking Norwegian so we could be American. I pointed out several things, and one of those is if we stop speaking our language, it's gone and dead forever. This is where our languages were born. This is where our languages have been oppressed. This is where our languages are currently dying. So as it got to the Senate, it got increasingly hard. It got to the point where we began to realize we might not succeed. We learned that the opposition was coming from one particular office who was probably acting on behalf of several other people. And we asked him to engage with us. When I first went to his office, the person who was one of his assistants said, well, the senator is not against recognizing languages, indigenous languages. He just wants them to be in a different part of the Alaska statutes, like the state dog and the state flower. I said, well, that's very problematic because we're living human beings and we speak human languages. And we have problems going to museums and seeing great pieces of art and great pieces of culture, and then we're over there with the wolves. Not that the wolves are bad company, but that colonization often determines who's human and who is not. And that is a foundational piece of federal Indian law and of the United States colonial history. So when he came out and engaged with us, the timing was perfect. Because sometimes when people engage with me in debate, I get really fired up. But on the right is Liz Medicine Pro. To the left of her is her mother, Delachine. To the left is their friend Sharon Short. I had a camera, I took this picture. Somebody else took video of it. And this interaction was wonderful. Because he finally came out, and I'll give him credit for coming out to debate this. And I summarized what I saw were some of his points. Because he said to me, in a really dramatic voice, which I'll reenact, we are one step away from mandating Alaska languages. And I thought, let's take that step, bro. And on the floor, when he gave his concession, because we wanted, he said, recognizing these languages as official languages will only create more racial tension. And I thought, wait, let me do the math. So 1945. Add 60 years, add 10 more, add 2 more. So in 72 years, you don't got a new argument other than equity creates tension? And I thought it was crazy, but he was very powerful. He's a very powerful senator. And he came out to debate, and he said, well, you know, I don't know why people are mad at me because I'm trying to ask the hard questions. There's a lot of people who don't think about laws and what happens in the long term when you pass a law. That's all I'm trying to get people to talk about. And so that's basically what he said. Liz Medicine Crow said, that's why I went to law school. And she had this nice little pause. And then she said a number of things, including, people like to say I'm just playing devil's advocate. And I say, don't blame the devil. Just own it. Take responsibility. So we had this entrenched battle. It was amazing. We had a sit-in, we brought cameras, we did all kinds of stuff. I saw just bizarre exchanges, including a senator who proclaimed himself, not in public, but I was there, the great white chief of the Tlinkits. It was a strange situation. But we have wonderful advocates like Deacon Charles Rohrbacher, who was offended by the fact that people would say it's purely symbolic. And he held up his cross and he said, this is a symbol, but it's a powerful symbol. Why are people suddenly against symbols or trying to minimize what symbols are? And so as we sort of encountered this, I kept thinking about the things that we've been told, including the words of the late great Hajapati, Walter Sobel, who said, anak ya akundayin, ajawe yakuwana page, kashkon akat isawu kapok, ya yakei at, yasingitani kapuzati at, ha akak hasfunehi at, kashkwan yiji dahushi hip, kashishat, aya akak haspuzati, ya hashabu. So he says, don't leave it behind, or they are leaving it behind. That's why they say, don't forget our wonderful way of life. This wonderful thing that was born on the world. And on this world, this is the thing that saved them. Don't ever let it fall from you. Hold on to it. This, it was born for us, our ancestors.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. That was great. Thank you. My name is Robin Walls. I'm a history professor here. I'm not from here. I've lived here for 20 years. You know, I live a life where the more I know, the more I learn, the less I actually know about almost anything. I have the good fortune of being here today because Lance and I teach in this room together during this hour. We're doing the Humanities 120 Sense of Place, Alaska and Beyond class. And I hope the students are having a good time because we're having a really good time. As a historian, American history is not my forte. It's not my area at all, in fact. I was trained as a Europeanist, early modern Europe. Came here and decided to get rid of Western civilization and try to do world history, even though I wasn't really sure what that was going to mean as a survey. But I've been doing it now for a number of years. There's a couple of things that came to mind while Kune was speaking, and I'd like to sort of, my talk is not as prepared as his. It's going to be a little bit rambling, I'm afraid. But I have a couple of ideas. I'd like you maybe to try to keep in mind while I'm going through the things I'm going to talk about here. First of all, one idea, and I'm saying this as a historian. This is sort of my conceit. This is my perspective and bias as a historian. There's nothing natural or normal about the present. This is kind of hard because we're all born into the world and we think that the world that we are living in is kind of natural and normal, and we just think this is the way that it is. But we live the past in the present. In fact, we only experience the past in the present. We can't go back into the past to experience it. We can't set it up like a scientific experiment in a lab and control our variables and do all that kind of stuff. We only always live in the present, and yet it's not the present. Okay? It's this outcome of events and processes that I may or may not even be aware of. And as I personally enjoy a kind of privilege in living in this society on a number of levels, which sort of gives me the belief that I can go ahead and opt out on that one if I want. I can just go ahead and set it aside and ignore it if I want. That's what I tell myself. But that's not true. So the first one is that there's nothing natural or normal about the present. The second one has to do with my everyday world. The one that I go through is inexorably intertwined with this present. It washes all around me. It's the water I swim in and move in. I become, to use one of my references, surrealist Andre Breton, I am a soluble fish. Okay? I am a soluble fish in that water. So, knowing that, I suppose I could be a goldfish. I don't know if you've read, what's the, oh, this is like a side. It's accidental something or other in particle physics. Marcia Pelsa, I think her name was, who wrote that novel. It's pretty fun. She goes to the end and she talks about a goldfish in a gold bowl. She's her high school valedictorian, and she has to be like, or her character is in the novel. And she gives this really strange high school graduation speech. And she talks about, you know, wanting to be a goldfish in a bowl because from her observation, like, the goldfish won't remember what happened 3 seconds ago. Like, every moment is like these 3 seconds. Okay. So awareness, first of all, for me is a place to start. I try to do that. I've tried to do that. I've learned to do that over 20 years. I'm not as good at it, but I know it's what I need to do. As I live here in Decolonial, I just have to keep my eyes and ears open. Keep my eyes and ears open and maybe not talk when I hear something. Even if I want to respond, maybe what I just need to do is sit back a bit, keep my eyes and ears open, not feeling like I always need to comment, and especially not feeling like I need to be defensive about anything. This is one of the real curiosities for me as I watch interpersonal dynamics between people in rooms. Is like there are lots of reasons why people become defensive. Anna Freud said there's 7 of them. There's 7 defense mechanisms that kick in for people all the time, she said. Okay? But I try as much as possible to resist those defensive things. And once again, my acknowledgement that I actually have a kind of luxury of doing that as well. Since I actually have some of that privilege, I should exercise it, I think, in responsible ways. All right. I have 2 things I think I'm going to talk about. One is just like, why are we doing Indigenous Peoples Day? This open door is bothering me. I think that, like, you know, now that I'm an adult, that thing that was like under my bed as a child, it's going to actually come through that door unless I close that door. my anxieties and fears just get bigger, you know. First of all, Indigenous Peoples Day, right, replaces Columbus Day. Which takes me to like this question of like, why do we even have Columbus Day at all? Like, why is there even a Columbus Day? It's particularly strange in the United States of America, where Columbus never came here. He never came to North America. He landed on, as you know, Hispaniola. That's the big island in the Caribbean. That's Haiti and the Dominican Republic today. I mean, that's where he landed. And then when the Spanish conquistadors and missionaries came afterwards, they didn't even really hit up all of North America that much. I mean, they were there in the Caribbean, along the Gulf Coast, through Mexico, Central and South America. All got just totally wiped out, overwhelmingly by disease. But also, when you read Bartolome de las Casas' short account of the destruction of the Indies, he has these astronomical numbers, which are probably exaggerated, but it's a way of saying this is happening at a massive scale everywhere. That's what he was trying to communicate with the kind of figures and numbers that he was given. But he was the only one among kind of the Spanish priests. He was the only one who wrote a book saying, what we're doing here is awful. Sepulveda and the others praised the conquistadors. Cortez praised himself. Pizarro used Cortez as a playbook for how to get rid of the Inca. But not the United States of America. Like, what happened specifically there? Why Columbus? First Columbus Day was celebrated in New York City in 1866, right? An American event right on the heels of the Civil War. Kind of curious to think of like Columbus Day being maybe a way of trying to, in part, heal in some little way what the nation had gone through in the Civil War. The first Columbus Day parade is in San Francisco in 1868. It's an Italian immigrant community in San Francisco, much smaller than it would be in the next few decades. That's going to come back into this statue here in my story about it. Columbus Day doesn't become a federal holiday until 1937. I mean, to me, like, that's a shocker. That's only 20 years before I was born that Columbus Day became an official holiday in the United States of America. It's kind of mind-numbing. It's like, why 1937? What little I know about American history in 1937, not so good. It's like the Great Depression is going on. Nativism is going on, which isn't native at all. It's about America for the Americans, meaning very explicitly white Americans in those days. And xenophobia. It was also, we're living through an age of anti-immigrant sentiment. 1937 was one of those times as well. Keep all the foreigners out. The United States is going through that at the time as well. All right, and what have I got here? I've got this picture of, this is a 12-foot high statue of Columbus in San Francisco, California. If you've ever visited San Francisco, North Beach, there's a Coit Tower. This is right at the bottom of Coit Tower. Vittorio de Cobertaldo, he was the sculptor commissioned to do this. Dedicated on October 12, 1957. That is my birth year. Now, I didn't know that. I lived in San Francisco in the mid-1980s. And one day I was in the North Beach area, went up to Coit Tower. This is really kind of cool WPA murals up there. If you climb the staircase, you can look at them in the top. They're really, really fantastic. And when I was there on this day, this shot has all these flowers down here, but right there at the pedestal of the statue was just heaped with flowers, And I kind of thought, wow, why? I know the statue's here, and then I hadn't even thought about it. It was Columbus Day. It was Columbus Day, and probably the Italian American community in San Francisco which not as mistreated as the Chinese, who took advantage of the fire in San Francisco, and I think it's 1905. I might be a year or two off. In 1905, moved into like the burned out area of the city, where they could like actually construct their own neighborhoods in their own city because nobody wanted it at the time. They lived next door to each other. The Italian community and the Chinese are living next door to each other in the North Beach area, and there were sort of, you know, circumstances. Nobody passed any laws, but circumstances ghettoized them in this sort of neighborhood of the community, right? So this 12-foot high statue comes in there, and the positive flip side to this, proclaimed by the city, by the San Francisco Human Rights Commission, as recently as 2007, was the statue was meant to celebrate the contributions of Italian Americans and their heritage, right? Because Columbus was Italian, right? Came from Genoa. He was hired to do his job, right? So, you know, and I just kind of thought about it that way. At the base of the statue is a message from Pope Pius XII, another somewhat infamous figure in 20th century history, if you don't know about the role of Pius and World War II. Reading, presented to the people of San Francisco by the Columbus Monument Committee, with grateful acknowledgement to all the donors who made this memorial possible, including the city of Genoa for its donation of the pedestal, and the Marini family for the gift of the marble ring. Vittorio di Ubertaldo, designer and sculptor. And I learned a couple of more things. I learned that the Marini family, there were these big philanthropists in San Francisco. This was their contribution to the city to pay for this. Ubertaldo, I found out, was an Italian fascist. He did fascist sculpture for Mussolini. And I also found out that the Columbus Monument Committee still exists today. Let me find out where I've got somewhere here in my notes. They continue to be active today and continue to put up monuments to Columbus, even today in the United States. I'm not picking out exactly where. Oh, here they are. Connecticut. A new one was unveiled in the last year in Southington, Connecticut, as, quote, a gift to the Italian American community. And this raises this question for me of, in the celebration of my culture, whoever I am, whatever my culture is, to what degree is it okay to trample over other people in the process, right? Monuments. San Francisco is a great city for monuments. And Golden Gate Park, I live by Golden Gate Park. There's tons of them there. There's Millard Fillmore, isn't that right? The president. I didn't even know there was a statue of this guy like anywhere. And there's one and I go, wow, there's a statue of him there. Okay. You'll find lots of interesting statues in Golden Gate Park if you don't visit. Okay, so that's that one. I just have one more kind of little thing. It's not like the people of San Francisco are unaware of this either. There's lots of statues in San Francisco, and I'm choosing San Francisco because I lived there. I think that's why I did this. I have these lived memories. So all of a sudden, I had this memory of like the statue with all the flowers on it. The more I kind of learn about this statue and the committee that placed it and everything around it, you know, I feel a little less warm and fuzzy inside about all of that. Okay. This one here, the early days statue. This was put up much, much earlier, at the very end of the 19th century. Sort of, for perspective, this is bury my heart at Wounded Knee time in American history. Okay. Oh, I think it's supposed to be, yeah, Vito Frank. Vito Frank it's supposed to be a space there. Happersberger designed this. And we have got, and the thing about this, so 1894, the original dedication happened at what was City Hall then, but today, the statue there, you can see the early days, is this plaza, this big plaza of buildings here is called Civic Center in San Francisco. And this is City Hall right here, okay? And there's these statues, and this is it. It's on the back side of this pillar here, right? And it has, this is a Spanish conqueror, all right? We can't really see it here because we don't have an angle. His other hand is in a fist. Apparently, a few decades ago, they took the sword out of his hand. They compromised by having it just be a fist now. And here is, you know, a missionary. And here is, you know, this, you know, nearly naked Indian who please forgive me, I need to look this up, the name of the people who of the San Francisco area. Yes, it is. Say that again. The Ohlone people. Thank you very, very much. The Ohlone people. This is not like any kind of depiction of an Ohlone person, for example, at all, and clearly is put in this very submissive, vulnerable. You know, there's no doubt there as to what his status is. This, in the past couple of decades, this statue has become controversial in San Francisco, and just a week ago today, the San Francisco Arts Commission has decided that they're getting into the process of like taking it down. They're going to be removing this statue, just like what's being commemorated here. They're not really interested in that being sort of having an official place in Civic Center, and the idea that it could be contextualized with plaques explaining that like things were really, really bad and racist then, and that's what's being represented here. The decision has been made to say, nah, we'd just rather take it down. All right. And then the last thing I'm going to do here, I'm not going to talk about this, but I want to make a little recommendation. My recommendation is our colleague and our dear friend, Ernestine Hayes, our writer laureate this year, delivered a magnificent talk at the Alaska State Museum this August. And it's up on YouTube. And I would really encourage everyone to go. Because she poses this question, what shall we do with our heroes? Because what I was just, the kinds of things I was just trying to get at there through a couple of statues, she writes large for the culture, for the American culture. And some of our students read Dow Raven, where she repeats the story of, you know, imagine the United States is taken over, you know, and, you know, English can't be spoken, and she goes on and on and on with this kind of thought exercise, right? But to hear her deliver that thought exercise, if you haven't ever heard it before, I really encourage you to go. It takes no longer than Kune and I took, and I think that's about all of what I have to say. So my last two things again. My two ideas that you were supposed to keep in mind while I ramble. There's nothing natural or normal about the present. And our everyday world is inexorably intertwined with that present. in all kinds of little ways.
Right. Any thoughts, questions, responses?
I like what you said about, I don't remember your exact words, but you said something along the lines of, we are not going to be one people, we are not going to be one group. If we are, we have to choose who's it going to be, right? And we know the answer to that question. And this makes me think, so we have this notion, that democracy is sort of related to the ethno-nation state, ethno-national identity, to be a good, whatever, democratic citizen entails and adheres to certain kinds of American values and principles. I think it's useful to keep in mind to abstract democracy from ethno-national identity and really emphasize that democracy is a fundamentally violent and right and contentious set of forces that ethno-nationalism has to curtail and solve that contradiction. But just thinking about public discourses around democracy, less about how we should, quote, all get along, and more about, no, there needs to be more conflict. There needs to be more contestation, more like, no, we're not the same. And then kind of figure out where to go from there.
Thank you. Yeah, I would agree. We've got to be okay with getting into a place of discomfort, right? Because if people sometimes are looking for comfort and sort of niceness, assuming that there has been comfort and niceness. And so I think also you could be united in causes and you could be interested. And so one of the things I wanted to say at the onset was, let's get to know each other. Because there shouldn't be this assumption that we're all going to the same place. I think the other thing, there's a couple of things I think about, is one, I'm in a cohort of folks who are studying language revitalization at the University of Hawaii in Hilo. And we talk a lot about some of these things, and some of our teachers there, William Wilson and Scott Sapp, they talk a lot about covert and overt sort of policy, right? So policy is really fundamentally like what people do, right? So there's certain policies. Like there's some things that are overt, so you have laws, and then there's some things that are covert, where there's no laws, but there are behaviors that dictate what people do. So for example, you couldn't come to class with no clothes on. Like something would happen. And there's a law, right? There's a law. I'm pretty sure there's a law. If not, we should probably have clothing has to be worn. But I don't think there's a law that says, for example, I was in my home community of Skagway and talking to somebody, and she was really mad. And I don't know why she got mad. I don't know why she even told me any of this stuff. Afterwards, I thought she must not know me at all. What she said was, I was on the ferry, and this guy was working, and I was getting really mad because he wasn't working hard. I was like, oh, okay. And he was picking up the dishes on the ferry. And so I took my notebook, and I was writing the times and what he was doing. And I just thought, oh, this is getting weird. And then she said, yeah, he was sitting, and he would go visit with people. And she says, like, it's getting, like, she's getting more and more dramatic. Like, I don't know, I don't have the social graces to just be like, okay, just stop, because I'm already uncomfortable. I just sort of listen, and then later I'm like, so anyways, I didn't feel it was a situation to engage. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And then she says, and then when he would sit with his friends, he would start speaking his language. And this is what she says, I know for a fact that he is required to speak English while he was working, so that the other people don't get uncomfortable. And I thought to myself, I think she 100% just made that up. I could be wrong, but I don't think there's no law. There isn't a law that I know that says when I go to Fred Meyer or whatever store, I must conduct all of my business in English. Right? If I just went there and just spoke Tlingit, there was a checker at Safeway. She doesn't work there anymore, but I could speak Tlingit and talk to her. It was really fun. I'd go to her line every time just so I could speak Tlingit. But those are more like covert things where there's this sort of standard of behavior. And those are things that we should continue to examine. Because I think one of the other things to examine is this idea that you have to be one thing. And it's not like we all have to be one thing. That's one side of it. But the other side of it is like, you have to be one thing. This is why people say, yeah, I'm part whatever, and I'm part this, and I'm part that. Because we compartmentalize identity, and you have to buy into this one thing, or else people are going to get uncomfortable. And I've been on the other side of it. When Walmart was here, and sometimes I'd be shopping at like midnight, because you could shop at midnight at Walmart. And if you have little kids, sometimes you run out of diapers at midnight, right? And so I was there, and there was hardly anybody there. And as I walked up, the checkers were all talking, and what I would guess would be Tagalog. And I said, hey, what language are you guys speaking? And like, I was trying to be like super nice, and everything got really uncomfortable. Like I popped the bubble. And then they told me, they said they're speaking Tagalog. I said, oh, that's so cool. I speak, my language with my kids. And like, we couldn't quite recover socially is what I felt. It's like, I made it awkward. Let's buy my diapers. These are things we should explore. We're the ones who are in control of the small situations. Collectively, we're in charge of the big situations. I don't know if there's any billionaires in here, so you might be the exception of being in charge of the really big situations. But outside of that stuff, you can affect change. And one of the things I didn't mention was Jonathan Christ Tompkins was in the audience when I gave a speech about things we could do for our languages. And I remember there were two people who came up to me that were both, I think, representatives. And one of them said, hey, that was a really good job. I don't agree with it. That was a really good job. And I was just like, what? And then Jonathan Christ Tompkins, he said, what can we do? How do we do it? And so he and I went out for coffee, and we just sat down, we sort of laid out these ideas, and he said, this official language one, I think we can do that. And we did, and he was very savvy politically, and Liz Medicine Crow was very savvy, and we brought, we found who was keeping it. There was somebody who was keeping it from going on the floor. And I think because she was told to. And so we went, and we brought about 100 people, and we sat outside the front door. And we told the media, so there were news cameras there, and there were other people there. And we showed up, and we're singing songs, and we're glaring at people. That's kind of part of protesting. And I remember somebody came out from her office and said, she really appreciates you guys, and she's in support of this, and it's going to go on the agenda so you guys can go home. And so I've been around, I don't know how politics work. My colleague Glenn Wright says, if you go, it's like learning how they make sausage. Like, do you really want to know? And so I don't really go and watch them make sausage. Sometimes I do. But this was my only real experience going in. And but I had an instinct. So my instinct was to tell him, well, as soon as we see it on the agenda, we will move upstairs and wait till it gets onto the floor. And so you can tell your boss that that's our case. And we said, and everybody was uncomfortable who came in and out of that office. We went in there several times. And then we did, and then we saw it. She put it on the agenda. I don't think she would have if there weren't cameras. But she did. And she should get credit for it. So then we go upstairs. And we wait. And it's just a weird environment. I don't know how else to put it. But we knew that it was either going to live or die that day. It was Easter Sunday. We showed up at 9 o'clock in the morning. Throughout the day, we probably had 150 people. By the end, there were probably 30 who stuck with it. And then we knew it was going to be on the agenda. And we also knew that we had all the votes. It was just a matter of, sometimes you got to be very, the A and B, the Alaskan Native Brotherhood, the Alaskan Native Sisterhood, they taught us how to do these things. count up your votes and then go in and make them vote. Because that's what it comes down to. Because their goal was to keep it off the agenda so it would just die. That was their goal. And so I want, maybe we should have like kind of statues, but it would be like, look at what kind of awful thing this guy said. That was terrible, because sometimes we name streets after people, or we name things after people. We don't even say why. What do they do? And I don't like to sort of say, hey, see that guy? That's a bad guy. I don't really like stuff like that. But I do like to say, oh yeah, this guy said, you know, equality means racial tension. I just want to explore that. I just want to, I'm like, can we talk? Can we just talk about that some? Because I think there's people who are really afraid of equity. I think there are people who are really scared. And so we talked about this in one of my other classes the other day. There were people who opposed a bill that was literally called the Violence Against Women Act. The reason they were opposed to that is they said, well, I don't think this is the forum to talk about sovereignty, tribal sovereignty in Alaska. It's like, well, I might be able to see where you're coming from, but I think you're taking the wrong stance, not us. But then there was another, the reason I got confused with Ketchikan Daily News and Ketchikan Daily Newsviner is because the Fairbanks Newsviner editor wrote an editorial there. That basically, and you go find this stuff, right? This was interesting. So in their editorial, they said, the Violence Against Women Act would be bad for Alaska. And what the Violence Against Women Act does is it says, in cases, there's these weird laws, like if there's tribal courts in America, and if you are a non-Indigenous person, the federal government can remove you from the tribal court and say, you're not going to try that. We'll try it in the federal court. What the Violence Against Women Act does, in short, is say, well, in cases of domestic violence against women, the federal government cannot. They have to be tried in the tribal court. So what the editor of the Fairbanks Daily Newsviner wrote is white people could never get a fair trial in a tribal court. And I just thought, based on what? That Alaska Natives are about 18% of the population and 40% of the prison population. Do you think we're going to do things that were done to us? Because we probably wouldn't. So those are things that I think about on Indigenous, well, on Indigenous Peoples Day, but I think about them all the time. But on Indigenous Peoples Day, they give me a microphone. Anything else? Yeah.
I've been at the university for about a month, and I think the perception I'm building of you so far is that we kind of look to you as being on the forefront of decolonization at a structural level. I'm in the ODS program. Last week we're hiking on Thunder Mountain, and Forrest, the program director, mentioned that you were involved in getting the name changed officially on the map to the Thunder name. I think what I imagine is that behind the scenes, you're meeting opposition and oppression and pushing back and, you know, kind of paving the way for decolonization. And then you come to school and you seem lighthearted and happy, you make jokes. How do we incorporate decolonization into our everyday lives without coming across as people that are like waging war? You know, how do you do that?
Well, as far as incorporating decolonization into your life, I think there's a number of things that I would respond to. And one is somebody asked me today, whose shoulders do I stand on? And I say, well, my grandma taught me how to be a resistor, and so did Nora, and so did many others. And there's all kinds of people, Walter Sokolov and Dennis Demert and many others who made what I do look really neat. And I say, sometimes I feel like I came along and there was this cake, and I put like a blueberry on top of it, and somebody took a picture. It's like, look what he did. I was like, I just put a blueberry on top. And so sometimes what you see is actually the spear tip of a lot of people who have made something really amazing. But what I would say is to be persistent and don't let the opportunity pass. Sometimes something's going to happen and you're just going to feel uncomfortable. And I think a lot of people just let that pass. And I've been called what was it? Totalitarian. I've been called, I've been told I have like, oh, people just have a few interesting things to say. And sometimes when I talk, people just get up and leave. And I'm okay with that. Short Alexi once said, I don't feel successful unless somebody walks out. Okay, well, but I think, and also to just pay attention to all these things that the old people have said. And to also, you know, we asked this one elder, she was Lakota, my friend Memingo Flying Earth, that was her grandmother. And she came to spend time with us. And we said, how do you do it? How do you just not be just angry? Just, because you see it all over the place. You have a hard time. One, you got to let yourself rest. You got to know that you're in it for the long haul, and to be kind with people who are also in it for the long haul. Sometimes we could be so unkind to each other, and we still want the same thing. The other thing I'd say is to find places and times to breathe and to laugh. Laugh with your families and your friends. Because there's nothing like the laughter of people who are being crushed by oppression. Like we'll just laugh and we'll just like tell the same crazy joke over and over. But also, like, we asked her, and she said, every day I wake up and I pray in my language, in Lakota, that I can be like a hollow reed, and everything just passes through me. No matter what I encounter for the day, I try to find a way to let it go. Because I think that's one thing, the colonial mechanism is to make you feel like you're carrying all of these tremendous burdens, when really someone else is carrying those and trying to put them on your head. So, last one,
my Irish culture has a saying, Tir Ganam, Tir Ganam. It means a people of the land without their own tongue is a people of the land without their soul.
Cheesh. Yeah, well, cheesh. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you guys for all your time and attention. Yeah, well. Good job.
Okay.